I think this would be an anomaly anywhere it would have taken place, whether it's Southern Ohio or anywhere else.
New video shows the reactions of those four Siders family members as they were taken to jail after deputies said they found 16 children in their home. I'll take you through these videos and what they show us. And we'll also look at what's likely going on inside the investigation right now. I'm Angenette Levy, and this is Crime Fix. Four members of the Siders family were booked into jail more than 2 weeks ago on child endangering charges, and we now have video just released of those family members being taken to jail. Only 3 of the Siders remain in jail at this point. Gary Siders Jr., his wife Elizabeth Siders, and his mother, Christina Siders. She goes by Lynn. They're being held on a $300,000 bond each. Gary Siders Sr. was released from jail to a hospital for treatment for a serious medical condition, so he's no longer in jail. All 4 Siders family members have pleaded not guilty to the charges, but the investigation, it's continuing. The 16 children range in age from 1.5-year-old twins to an 18-year-old. The Vinton County prosecutor says those children were found in the house on Omer Street, living in squalor on June 30th, as deputies and state agents executed a search warrant in connection to another investigation. All of the children are now in foster care, but we really don't have any information about their conditions or how they're doing. We know they're in therapeutic foster care. But now we're getting our first look at the parents and grandparents of those children being taken to jail. Video from the jail's Sally Port shows a sheriff's van pulling into the jail. The Siders aren't the only ones in the van, so it takes some time for the corrections officers to get them out of the vehicle. The first Siders family members that jail staff removed from the van is the oldest, 73-year-old Gary Siders Sr. It appears the officers are having some trouble getting him out of that van. They're at the back of the vehicle for a while as they try to help him out. And then an officer brings a wheelchair out from the jail so Gary Sr. can sit in it so the jail staff can safely move him into the jail for the booking process to begin. Now, we know that there are concerns about Gary Sr.'s health and his ability to walk. He's currently being treated for a serious medical condition at the hospital. But back on June 30th, that serious medical condition wasn't known to jail staff. That was only discovered after he fell on the way to jail and was taken to the hospital for that injury. At this point, Gary Sr. is safely in the wheelchair, and the officers prepare to move him from the Sally Port to the jail. He appears to have a white bandage on his shoulder. Why? We don't know. At the same time, other officers are trying to get Gary Jr. out of the back of the van. Gary Jr. is in handcuffs, so he is pulled from the back of the van so he can be led into the jail hallway with his father. Interestingly enough, Gary Siders Sr. is shackled at the ankles, and he is also handcuffed at the front. Those cuffs are attached to a belly chain to keep him secure. A male corrections officer wheels Gary Sr. into the hallway. This is the area where an initial search of inmates is conducted. Every jail has an area similar to this one. You'll notice that Gary Sr. is not shackled at the ankles like his son. Gary Sr. is wearing pajama bottoms, and he seems a little out of it. Gary Jr. trails behind his father, again shackled at the ankles and handcuffed, and those cuffs are held in place by that belly chain. The officers tell Gary Jr. to lean up against the wall, and then they uncuff him so the booking process can begin. One thing that I notice here, Gary Jr. appears to be pretty well fed, and his father appears thin. We don't know how well the children in the home were eating, but Gary Jr. doesn't appear to have missed many meals. As an officer uncuffs Gary Jr., he's told to stand against the wall, and then the officer moves to unlocking his ankle cuffs. The officers will then remove Gary Sr.'s handcuffs. As this entire process is unfolding in the hallway, Christina Siders and Elizabeth Siders remain in the Sally Port in that sheriff's van. Eventually, one of the officers looks inside Gary Jr.'s mouth to make sure that he doesn't have anything in there. And then Gary Jr. is taken to another area of the jail for further processing. Gary Sr. sits in the wheelchair as this is going on, and we don't know what he's thinking or feeling, but eventually he seems to put his head in his hands. He continues to sit in that wheelchair as the jail staff continues their work. Several minutes pass. Then it's Gary Sr.'s turn to be searched, but he needs help getting out of the wheelchair. He can't do it on his own. He's searched to make sure he doesn't have anything on him like a weapon. Now it's time for the officers to bring Christina Siders and Elizabeth Siders into the jail. Christina is let in first. She is handcuffed just as her son and husband were, but she isn't shackled at the ankles. And you may notice something interesting here when you see Elizabeth Siders. You'll notice she's carrying some papers, but Elizabeth Siders isn't handcuffed. Christina enters the jail hallway first. Elizabeth follows behind, and both have papers in their hands. Christina's handcuffs are connected to a belly chain, just like Gary Jr., but she is not shackled at the ankles. Christina stands up straight, but Elizabeth's body language appears to be much different. She's practically cowering. She looks scared. The corrections officer asks Christina a number of questions, which she appears to answer. Elizabeth simply stands by and watches as this entire process unfolds. Then it's Elizabeth's turn to be searched. After answering a few questions, she's patted down the whole 9 yards. This process takes place before each of the Siders family members are moved to another area where each is given an orange jail jumpsuit to wear. It's standard issue. All of the Siders were moved into another area for intake, and they're asked a number of questions by a jail staff member. You can see Elizabeth sitting here. Her hair is wet, so it appears she had a shower. Her hair looks different from her mugshot. Elizabeth looks around at times. She doesn't have a criminal record, so this is the first time she's been to jail. Elizabeth also has a mark on her left arm, and it looks like a bruise. We don't know what caused that mark. It's also visible in video from her arraignment. Gary Sr. is wheeled into the same area. It's the same process. There's no audio, but he's asked a number of questions. At one point, he appears to get comfortable and leans back in the wheelchair and even crosses his legs, just kind of sitting and waiting for what's next. A similar process takes place for Christina Siders. She sits in the same area and answers questions. And then Gary Jr. goes through the intake process. He is asked, along with his family members, a standard set of questions. Gary Jr. sits and answers questions that he's asked, just as his family members did. Gary's intake form says that he either uses drugs or alcohol or is under the influence of one or the other. Jail staff documented several tattoos on Gary Jr. They have names and hearts and crosses. One is a cross with a sword. One is an outlaw tattoo with a peace sign. In the intake video, you can see Gary Jr. show the officer asking him the questions his arms. He later shows his legs, likely showing the many tattoos. At one point, Gary Jr. looks back and he waves at someone. We don't know who he's waving at, but he appears to talk too. But there are so many questions that remain in this case. Many, many questions. What is going on with this investigation? Why did the deputies go to the house in the first place with a search warrant? Gary Jr. also faces 4 public indecency charges related to alleged incidents at his home during the last week of May, but that likely wouldn't be enough to get a search warrant. The deputies were looking for evidence of a crime at the home. That's what a search warrant is for. And the Attorney General has said electronic devices seized from the home will be analyzed by the crime lab. The Columbus Dispatch has reported that 2 other Siders family members, one a cousin of Gary Sr., married a 15-year-old girl. So there are 2 other members of the Siders family that had teen marriages. How common is that in Southeast Ohio? So I'd like to bring in Rob Junk. He is the former Pike County prosecutor, also currently a common pleas court judge in Pike County, the only common pleas court judge there. And he actually was the prosecutor when the Roden and Gilly family members, the 8 members of that family, were murdered back in 2016. Rob, thanks so much for coming on to talk with me about the Siders case.
Oh, you're entirely welcome.
Talk to me right now, from your perspective as a former prosecutor. What do you think is going on in this investigation right now? You're in the county right next door, in Pike County, next to Vinton. So what do you think is happening as far as getting information together for the grand jury and the investigation?
I think probably the most important thing that they would be working on now is medical exams on the children, full medical workups, interviews, which probably taken place early on of the suspects. But it's a major thing is getting good medical workups on all the children to document any type of abuse or neglect that may have taken place and how it took place.
And I think that's a good point. They were all taken to the hospital on June 30th when they were found, and they were all evaluated. Some were in the hospital, it seemed like for 2 or 3 days, possibly, maybe even longer. One had to be intubated. We don't know the age of that child, but all of the children were taken to the hospital or hospitals to be checked out. Some of them were released pretty quickly, so that I guess that bodes well for the children. However, that's just to check them out and everything. You're saying they need to do further medical evaluations of these kids.
Yes, and behavioral as well too, because you're looking at abuse and neglect allegations, and you want to see how these children have been affected mentally and physically over the past few years and the time period they're looking at.
We know that the six older children, there were complaints filed in Gallia County against Gary Jr. and Elizabeth uh, because the six older kids had not been to school in 2021 at all. In October of 2021, they had not been to school. So it's been, those kids were at some point enrolled in school. Now we're years past that. The kids, I'm sure they've said, have not been in school. So what kind of challenge does that pose in evaluating these children? Because they could be very isolated, and it's been discussed by the attorney general. You know, he said something to the effect of like some of them may not even be verbal. So what kind of challenge does that pose in evaluating these children, do you
Yeah,
think?
that could be very challenging. Of course, the children will be interviewed, but if they haven't gone to school, haven't been exposed to the outside world, the question is what is their ability to communicate with others, relay the things that are alleged to have happened to them? That's the most important thing. And if the parents were keeping the children out of school under Ohio law, that is actually referred to as education neglect. When I was prosecutor, we would bring charges on parents for that on a regular basis through our truant
Mm.
officers.
How common is that for people maybe out in that area of Southeast Ohio to just not send their children to school? I know it's an issue throughout the state of Ohio, but down where you are, how common is that?
Uh, Our truant officers would file charges on a regular basis. However, it was for shorter periods of time. It would just be the parent wouldn't send a kid to school for whatever reason, but it wasn't like months and months or years or anything like that. Shorter periods of time. I think one of the worst ones I saw was maybe 3 weeks in a row, and our truant officers were pretty aggressive in monitoring those type of things as well too.
Hmm. So does this appear to be an anomaly then, even for Southeast Ohio, that you have kids who would not be in school for years?
I think this would be an anomaly anywhere it would have taken place, whether it's Southern Ohio or anywhere else.
The attorney general had said that they were going to be downloading devices, and that was a key comment uh, as far as I'm concerned in this investigation. He talked about downloading devices. We don't know how many devices were seized. We do know that the children, though, appeared to be on social media. They had social media accounts. They had phones. That's our understanding. So they're going to be downloading a number of devices they seized from that house. How telling could that be in assisting with this investigation? And also, that can take a lot of time.
I think that'd be very telling as far as the investigation. And we did that on the Roden Manley Gilly homicides. The Our sheriff's office and our other agencies in Pike County do that on a regular basis. You can glean a lot of information from, say, iPhones, iPads, Androids, those things like that. Locations, what the children were doing, what apps they were signed into, and basically just kind of seeing what they were doing over the last few years. And it is interesting with the situation that's alleged that these children would happen to have social media accounts. That is
Yeah.
very interesting.
Isn't it odd though? I mean, because we've looked at these social media accounts linked to the kids, and obviously it's the older kids. And there are no photos of them on these social media accounts. It's all Japanese anime, TikTok videos that are reposted. They've created some of these videos. And so some of them are quite sad, actually. And it seems like children kind of crying out for help.
At any time you have an alleged abuse or neglect case, it's always sad.
Yeah. I'm wondering if these phones were possibly given to the kids to entertain them, to keep them from just, wanting to go outside. Instead, you give your kid a screen. Most parents want to keep their kids off of screen. But in this instance, it appears possibly that these kids were given phones. How they could even afford phones, we don't know. But that's what it appears to be, a big part of this is let's keep these kids occupied potentially.
Yes, if they're playing around on phones, iPads, those type of things, the parents don't have to, you aren't going to be watching them or anything like that. Just hand the child a phone, put them in a room, and just ignore them. And that will be interesting to see what the phone dumps come out. And I imagine what they're going to do is send all these devices to BCI's, the
Hmm.
cyber crimes unit. They'll go through, download everything, review it. And again, that's something I've been through before in other cases. I'm pretty familiar with the process. It does take a long time to do some of that stuff. It's based on manpower as well, too. And I'm sure Attorney General Wilson is making this case a priority.
No doubt, because the case has to go to grand jury. These defendants have waived their right to a preliminary hearing at this point, and the next step is taking it to a grand jury. And so they're being held right now on those 16 child endangering charges. But depending on what comes of this investigation, what is found on the electronics, what the police interviews of the four defendants revealed. We know that Elizabeth, her lawyer, has said that she has cooperated fully with this investigation. So she sounds like she may have talked with the investigators. Um, this could be a big challenge, though, getting that to grand jury in the amount of time required. But Prosecutor Archer had said a week or two ago, a couple weeks ago, that he should have something about for that in a couple of weeks because they only have grand jury down there in Vinton County every month and a half or so.
Yes, that's common in southern Ohio counties. When I was prosecutor at Pike County, we had one just about every month. And our current prosecutor does the same thing. We would average
Mhm.
out now around 120 or so cases in a year. And we're not like Columbus or even Portsmouth or Cincinnati where you have thousands of cases a year.
Hmm. Yeah, they have grand jury. I know in Franklin County and Hamilton County, where Cincinnati and Columbus are located every day.
Yep.
So it's just a different environment, more populated, things like that. One thing I'm really curious about, it's come out, that Elizabeth and Gary Jr. obviously they were married when she was 15. They went over to West Virginia to do that. Then, there's been some reporting about other Siders family members, cousins, things of that nature, who were married at 15, 14, things like that. Rob, do you see that ever down that way? Like seeing like these teenage marriages and things like that? Is that common?
In Pike County right now, no. However, I do know in the past that it was a lot more common than it would be now. I don't know if it's a generational thing or just a geographic thing or something like that. We don't see anything like that now. And obviously, if I got wind that some adult was wanting to marry a 15-year-old, as prosecutor, my first call would be to Children's Services.
Mhm.
Second one, probably to the sheriff's office, just to be sure. So we just don't really see that much now. I know in generations past, people would get married very young, and the women even younger than the men. And I've heard
Hmm.
about that in Pike County, but luckily, I just don't see it much now. Thank goodness.
So this is uncommon in your experience as a prosecutor to see a 15-year-old girl going off and getting married. Maybe it was more common, you said, in generations past. I think we all can see that that has happened. But you're saying, in your experience as a prosecutor, if you got wind of that, you'd be calling the cops and CPS, and
Oh,
then
you
that
better
would be it.
you better believe I would have, because any adult having sexual relations with a child under 16 is a crime. And I would have wanted that investigated. And even today, as a judge, if I would get wind of something like that today, I would be calling our children's services and our sheriff.
Mhm. And I remember in the Roden case, Hannah Roden was pregnant when
Yep.
she was 15, by Jake Wagner. And after when the homicide indictment came down, he was charged with having sex with a minor because of that pregnancy.
Oh, absolutely. That would be unlawful sexual conduct with a minor. And that is a felony under Ohio law.
hmm So where do you see this case going, Rob? When do you think, like, as a former prosecutor in a similar county, when do you think this thing goes to grand jury?
If I had to guess, you want a complete and full investigation. I know Bill Archer, and I do know him a little bit. He had served as a special prosecutor for my office in the past. He'll want to make sure everything is complete, the investigation's done. I would venture to say probably a couple of more months or so. You want to make sure you get the medical evaluations done, get everything back from the Attorney General's office and BCI. But yeah, this type of case isn't something that you can do overnight. I would say there's probably several months worth of work on it.
That's interesting. And how long can you hold the Siders family while that's taking place?
Issue with speedy trial under Ohio law, you have 270 days to get someone to trial. However, if they're held in jail, every day counts as three. So normally, from the moment they were arrested, the state would have 90 days to get them to trial. So what may happen, and I have done this in the past when I was prosecutor, maybe bring some charges to get the case going. You keep investigating and add some down the road. And something like this, again, I'm not psychic, but I would anticipate, due to the complexity of it, you may see some time waivers on behalf of the defendants where they say, State of Ohio, I really don't care how long it takes you to get me to trial. And you see that a lot in homicide cases and complex investigations, because there's just so much evidence for the attorneys to go through that they're not going to be able to get it done by the time like 90 days for speedy trial runs. To give an example, when you were involved in covering the Road and Gilly homicides, that's the perfect example. They all had executed time waivers. And there are also some events that toll the time or stop the clock too, such as certain motions and things like that.
Well, we will keep an eye on it and see where it goes. Rob Junk, thank you so much for joining me. We appreciate it.
Oh, you're entirely welcome. Thank you, Angenette.
So, as I mentioned, this investigation is ongoing. It's far from over. A gag order has been granted in Gary Jr.'s case, but it's being challenged at the Ohio Supreme Court. Christina's attorney has requested a non-dissemination order, but the judge has not ruled on that yet, and the prosecution hasn't responded to that request. So there's a lot to unpack here, a lot to dig into, so stay tuned. We'll be on top of it. And that's it for this episode of Crime Fix. I'm Angenette Levy. Thanks so much for being with me. I'll see you back here next time.